Why Spock calls himself second officer, not first officer, in Star Trek Season 1. When Star Trek Strange New Worlds first premiered, one small but curious detail stood out to fans of the franchise. Spock introduces himself as the second officer aboard the USS Enterprise. For longtime Trekkies, this raised an eyebrow. After all, Spock is famously remembered as Captain Christopher Pike's trusted first officer, a position that became one of his defining roles even before Captain Kirk ever took the chair. So why does Strange New Worlds seem to demote Spock early on, or at least reframe his position? The answer lies not in a mistake, but in a subtle piece of Starfleet structure, historical continuity, and clever character storytelling that shows how the show honors canon while deepening Spock's arc. Let's break down what this really means and why Spock's choice to call himself second officer in Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1 is more revealing than it first appears. 1. The command structure of the Enterprise before Kirk. In the early episodes of Strange New Worlds, Captain Pike Anson Mount leads the Enterprise at the height of his command. By this time, the ship's bridge crew is already impressive. Una Chin Riley Rebecca Remeen, known by her nickname Number 1, serves as Pike's first officer. She's technically second in command and is directly responsible for the ship's day-to-day operations and the execution of Pike's orders. This makes Spock, though an officer of significant rank and authority, the next in line, not second. In Starfleet terms, that officially makes him the second officer. This title might sound like a semantic quirk, but it's actually part of Starfleet's naval-inspired hierarchy. The first officer or executive officer, XO, is the captain's immediate deputy, responsible for both crew management and strategic command. The second officer is a senior officer, usually the next most experienced or qualified individual after the first officer, who takes command only when both the captain and XO are unavailable. In this case, Number 1 is the first officer. Spock is the second officer. That's not a contradiction, it's how the chain of command is structured. 2. Number 1 came before Spock, literally and canonically. To fully understand this, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to Star Trek's original 1965 pilot episode, The Cage. In that story, Captain Pike's first officer is played by Majel Barrett, credited only as Number 1. Spock also appears, but he's clearly serving in a subordinate role under her command. At the time, Gene Roddenberry designed Number 1 as a bold statement, a woman serving as a starship's executive officer, a position of high authority and intellect. But network executives in the 1960s balked at the idea of a woman in such a commanding role, claiming that audiences wouldn't accept it. As a result, the character was dropped when Star Trek was retooled into the 1966 series starring William Shatner as Captain Kirk. That left Spock to take on the dual roles of science officer and first officer in the new version of the show, effectively absorbing both Number 1's and his earlier responsibilities. When Strange New Worlds resurrected Pike's era, the showrunners intentionally restored that original structure. Number 1 once again serves as first officer, and Spock, consistent with both canon and rank, identifies as the second officer. It's a respectful nod to the Cage and to the pioneering character who preceded him. 3. A lesson in Vulcan precision and Spock's literal mindset. There's another layer to this that fits perfectly with Spock's personality, his literal precision. Spock's Vulcan heritage makes him deeply concerned with accuracy and order. If the Enterprise's official chain of command lists him as second officer, then that's exactly what he'll call himself, even if, informally, he's often treated as Pike's right hand. Throughout Strange New Worlds Season 1, Spock demonstrates his commitment to structure and duty, sometimes to a fault. His relationship with Pike is warm and built on mutual respect, but it's always framed by regulation. By identifying as second officer, Spock isn't being modest, he's being precise. He knows his place in the hierarchy, and he honors it. This attention to detail adds another layer to his character. It reflects the constant balance he maintains between logic and emotion, between his Vulcan upbringing and human instincts. It's also a reminder that he hasn't yet developed the slightly more intuitive, emotionally aware Spock we see later alongside Kirk. In other words, Spock's title isn't just about rank, it's about identity. 4. Starfleet's chain of command rules explained. Starfleet's organizational model is heavily inspired by naval traditions, and those distinctions are very real. On an Earth vessel, the first officer is typically the executive officer. the captain's right-hand person who manages the crew and ensures that orders are executed properly. The second officer, meanwhile, might serve as the ship's science officer, chief engineer, or tactical officer, depending on their expertise. Their rank doesn't necessarily reflect their position in the command chain. For example, a lieutenant commander might be second officer if they're next in line for command rotation. In Strange New Worlds, this dynamic is consistent. Captain Christopher Pike, first officer Una Chin Riley, number 1, second officer/science officer Spock. This system also sets up a natural storytelling arc. If either Pike or number 1 were ever removed from command, as happens at various points in Star Trek history, Spock would immediately become acting first officer or even acting captain. So when he refers to himself as the second officer in Season 1, he's acknowledging that chain of command in its current state, not predicting the future where he'll become Kirk's first officer. 5. The hidden emotional layer. Spock's respect for number 1. What's particularly compelling about Spock calling himself second officer is that it shows an implicit respect for Una Chin Riley. Spock admires her intellect, discipline, and leadership, qualities that resonate with his Vulcan ideals. In Season 1, Episode 1, Strange New Worlds, Spock clearly defers to her command presence and shares a mutual trust that reflects their long working relationship. By identifying as second officer, Spock isn't diminishing his authority. He's acknowledging her superior position with grace and loyalty. This humility is key to understanding early Spock. Before the Kirk era, he's still learning how to balance his pride in his abilities with the Starfleet principle of teamwork. His acknowledgement of Una's authority shows a side of him that's not just logical, but ethical, guided by respect and integrity rather than ambition. It's a subtle contrast to later Starfleet officers who might bristle under command, and it foreshadows why Spock becomes such a valued first officer later. He learns by example from both Pike and number 1. 6. Foreshadowing the future. The path to Kirk's first officer. Spock's self-identification as second officer also foreshadows his future evolution in Star Trek's timeline. Fans know that eventually, he will rise to become first officer under Captain James T. Kirk, the role that defines his place in pop culture. Strange New Worlds cleverly positions his early career as a prelude to that transformation. By starting him as second officer, the show allows us to watch Spock's professional growth unfold naturally. Throughout Season 1, we see him make command decisions, challenge himself emotionally, and gain Pike's increasing trust. Each mission is a small step toward the confident, seasoned officer who will one day stand beside Kirk on the bridge. When Pike eventually leaves the Enterprise, and Una's fate takes her out of the chain of command, Spock's path to first officer becomes inevitable. The title shift, from second to first, will feel earned both narratively and emotionally. 7. A subtle canon fix that strengthens